meditation today, May 1st, 2017, is on desire. So let's talk about desire and what that means. Our quote today is from Patti Smith, who says, "Never let go of that fiery sadness called desire." So one of the things I've been really interested in lately is perception and how we perceive things so differently from each other because of the way, really, our brains work and how we are so highly adaptable as creatures and how we are imprinted from very early on. So what we actually see is relatively the same from person to person, but the way our optic nerve configures what we see is rather fuzzy. So if you're someone who wears glasses like me, when you take your glasses off and your focus is kind of fuzzy, that's more accurately how our brain sees things. And then we fill things in by way of our imagination, by way of our expectations, by way of all the patterns that we've grown up with along the way. So we are in general agreement when we look at something and say, oh, it's a table. But the nuances of that table may vary from person to person, and even more so when we're dealing with interpersonal relationships and bigger philosophical issues. And so when I look at Patti Smith's quote, she perceives desire as a fiery sadness, which sounds like something that is fraught with pain and longing, and almost something that we can't have, or if when we have it, we're ultimately going to get burned by it. Now, I don't know if that's what she meant when she said this, but this is my perception and what I'm reading into this quote. But let's take a look at how we thought about desire differently. So I think the word desire gets a bad rap because it's thought of in a sort of classic Judeo-Christian sinful sort of way. But when we sublimate all of our worldly desire and passion in order to live a spiritual life, that becomes problematic. That's an outdated and limited mode of what it means to be sanctimonious, let's say. And this idea of desire really only oppresses us. So it makes desire out to be something that's bad, something that's lascivious, something that's more of our animalistic nature and that we shouldn't want. And when we go back and look at the puritanical periods, they really were purporting this lack of desire as it related to sexuality, because the thinking was that our higher brain, our moral brains, our brains where we recognize value, which is really the cortex, the higher functioning part of our brain, should reign supreme over our more base desires. And it's true, if we didn't sort of modulate ourselves and control ourselves to a certain extent, we would be running amok all over the place. So using our good judgment, using our own personal morality, values, whatever you want to call it, is a good idea. But if we're only suppressing desire at all times, that's going to create oppression. And when we have oppression, then we start to have trouble, whether it's individually or, as a group of people. So it's assumed that desire in this construction is nothing more than an unending hedonistic quest, meaning a quest for unending pleasure, and it's devoid of any meaning or any discernment, which is not an accurate way of thinking about desire. So true desire is really a yearning to know oneself more fully. So take a minute to think about that. If my desire or your desire is really to dive deeply into yourself, to know yourself more fully, then this is not a one and done proposition. This is a lifelong quest of really diving deeper. And if we are indeed creatures that are intimate in nature, the way nature itself is intimate, then this quest to dive deeply is an infinite proposition. We do it from the day we're born till the day we die, if we are to be generative in our old age. If we're going to give up on ourselves, or we're just going to accept things as they are in that sort of resigned kind of way, then this desire, this hunger to live life, to have zest as we're living life, to enjoy, becomes thinner and thinner over time. So a more integrated approach to desire might combine using all of the senses, because we have 5 wonderful senses of taste, touch, smell, hearing, and what's the 5th one? Taste, touch, and vision, of course. And so do we really take time to let ourselves relish in the sensuality of our 5 senses? You know, smell is the oldest of our senses, the most primitive sense, and it goes directly to the brain. So we very rapidly know when we're in the presence of danger or not by way of smell. Also, when we're in love relationships and we are repulsed by the other person in that moment, it may be because that person is afraid. And they might be afraid of us if we're being particularly, angry or behaving in ways that don't feel safe to that person. They are going to emit an odor that may make us be pushed back from. So there's a revulsion there. And these are evolutionary parts of the human organism. So, but using smell as a way to really enjoy and desire what's around you. Right now in Southern California, we're having a super bloom, and that means that everything is on fire, including the jasmine, which is a night blooming jasmine here, and there's a perfume to this jasmine that is unmistakable, and it permeates the night air, and it's unbelievably delicious to take a walk at night and to inhale this perfume that's in the air. That is a form of desire, of sensuality. And we can do this with the food we eat, with the meals that we have, taking time to really savor your lunch today, to notice every bite that goes into your mouth, to chew your food instead of chewing your thoughts, and to taste how delicious the meal is that you're eating rather than gobbling it down. So that is a way of using desire in a sensual way. Listening to the sounds around you during the day, whether it's the sounds of children playing outside your window or your colleagues laughing in the hallway or music you're listening to in the car, and feeling the sensuality of the sun on your face as you take a walk perhaps this afternoon. Just noticing your surroundings and your desire to be on this planet, to relish in the human experience. Likewise, combining our consciousness, which is sort of what I'm talking about, is being aware of the senses, being aware that you are in a human body and that you have the absolute luxury, really, of having these experiences on a day in and day out basis. And do you share them with your partner or the people around you? And love is another thing that we all desire, whether we're desiring it from our pets or from our parents or from a lover or from a child. All of us desire this thing called love, this elusive experience that I think we feel moments of. When we're securely attached, we feel love as sort of the core of our being, kind of the baseline of everything, that we can walk through the world and feel relatively secure at any given moment. And the desire to want that is probably the deepest, most important desire, that desire of self-love. And then to also integrate our desire into all of humanity, to want the surroundings that you have, to see people on the street, to recognize them, regardless of whether they have brown skin or black skin or pink skin or, beige skin, that we really make eye contact with all of humanity and recognize that we bleed the same blood, that the same hearts beat and animate our bodies, that we are indeed one human body, one human race. And to desire peace and harmony with that is a high, high calling for peace on the planet, really. So when we make friends with desire, that will help us approach the fulfillment of our own personal longing for inner peace and freedom. So that's sort of a mouthload also. So making friends with desire, not pushing it away, not thinking that it's dirty or bad or greedy or wrong, and recognizing that we're really looking to fulfill our own personal longing for this inner peace I was talking for this grounded, solid sense of security or love. Now, as I talk about this, of course, it's riddled with paradox, as is all of life, because you could listen to what I'm saying and saying, oh, well, she's talking about, narcissism and grandiosity and self-servingness and greed and taking what you want and desiring everything you want. And that's not what I'm talking about. And that's where I started with this notion that desire is this hedonistic quest to have all things pleasurable. It is a quest for pleasure, but not at the expense of other people. And I think so often the quest for desire can have us forgetting that there are other people who will suffer if we are completely greedy in this quest. So Robert writes, would you say to men who, as described by Freud, cannot desire those they love and cannot love those they desire? So I'm curious about why that would be directed at men solely, unless you're saying that Freud directed it at men. And I think there's something there, again, there is a paradox in this and an inaccuracy. So it's true and it's not true. So if we take the first line that we cannot desire those they love, this, I think, speaks to the old Madonna-whore split in the psyche, and I would say of most men, and certainly most heterosexual men, where there's this notion that we cannot desire those that we love. When it becomes too familial, then this carnal desire drops off. Many other sex therapists talk about this too. Certainly Esther Perel talks about it, David Snarch talks about it. But I think what we're endeavoring to do today is to become more integrated in this arena so that we do desire the person that we love. And how we do that depends on how we infuse novelty into the relationship. So novelty can be infused by a number of ways, through external circumstances like sexual role play, various kink and fetishes that are being brought into the relationship that would ignite a novelty for carnal desire. Likewise, pornography ignites that novelty. Or we can go about it by way of the desire of deeply knowing someone else, of making eye contact and seeing them as a sexual being, not just neutering them because there's someone we love and therefore we can't do that with them, that being sexual arousal and excitement. And I think what happens is that we don't want to make ourselves vulnerable sexually to the person that we love the most, and therefore desire drops off. But when we can be ruthless about our sexuality in the way Jack Morin talked about, where we take what we want when it comes to sex and sexuality from our partners, and we let them see the most base animalistic part of ourselves, then I believe that we can have desire for those we love. And likewise, the rest of the saying is that we cannot love those that they desire. That also speaks to this split that I'm speaking of. And I've heard many, many males, heterosexual males, say this too, that they were women that they had sex with that were, sort of on the edge of something, or they were a little dirty and nasty in ways that they didn't respect or like. So they would never, have that person for a relationship, but boy, did they like having sex with them. And that, again, is splitting off and dividing that human being and really using them in somewhat, I would say, inappropriate ways, unless you're telling them right off the bat, hey, I don't think you're very smart, and I think you're kind of skanky, and I would never bring you home to meet my friends or family, but I want to have sex with you. Is that okay with you? See, nobody does that. Nobody's that honest. So they negotiate in these very surreptitious ways, and we steal bits and pieces of people in that way. Likewise, we don't tell our partners that, I love you and I think you're beautiful and smart and I respect you, but boy, I'm really not going to show you that sexual part of myself that I think that you would freak out about. And I don't know if I can see that part of you either, because that would change how I think about you. So we can see how convoluted and self-serving these matters can get when we're not rigorously honest with ourselves about desire and how we really want to know ourselves more fully, but will we reveal that to ourselves? Will we reveal that to our partners, all of who we are, or do we engage in self-deceit around that, where we're not really going to tell ourselves that we like something sexually or that we want something sexually, and we're certainly not going to tell anybody else about it. And then we settle for less, and we get sort of dead inside and feel kind of flat. And then we start looking for desire outside of ourselves and outside of our relationships, and then that can become perilous and messy in a whole different way. So does anybody else have any other questions about this matter of desire and the paradoxes that we can get caught up in or tripped up in? And if so, please feel free to just text me your message in the sidebar to your left. Okay. What about desiring your body? Our bodies are the vehicle in which we make our quest for fulfillment. It's how we comport ourselves in the world. It's sort of the vehicle or the car that we get for this soul or this animated mind and creature that we're going to carry around for the rest of our lives. And oftentimes, people forget that our body is embedded in our consciousness, that we are our body. And there becomes a split even between the body and the mind. And of course, increasingly, neuroscience has debunked that and has flatly laid out that the body-mind are one. There is no separation between the two. If you feel like you're going out of your mind, it's because the body has been under assault, typically through extreme violence or abuse or neglect. People that are tortured eventually lose their minds because their bodies cannot withstand the physical abuse that it's taking. The body cannot regulate itself, and so eventually it dissociates, and parts of the brain that are meant to protect us from all of this affect and feeling can no longer withstand the pressure of the abuse, and therefore we go out of our minds. And when we fully accept our body, then we can attain deep knowledge about ourselves. I know for myself, as I've gotten older, I've made much better friends with my body than in my youth, where I was always picking at how this wasn't good enough, or that wasn't good enough, or this was too small, or this was too big, and it didn't look like somebody in Vogue magazine, and blah, 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 blah. And all of that is an act of perpetuating violence against and a separation from one's very own self. So this idea that we can love ourselves and love our bodies isn't just that, oh, I'm loving my body now. It's my entire consciousness that I'm in touch with, that I'm caring for, that I'm treating with great reverence, which reminds me of the saying that our bodies are our temples. And indeed they are. If we abuse them, if we don't desire them ourselves, if we don't touch them ourselves, if we don't tend to our skin, for example, which is the largest organ in the body, then we are denouncing a vital part of who we are. And yet we want other people to worship our bodies and love us and tell us we're great and beautiful. But if we're not desiring ourselves first and foremost, then it's going to be very difficult to find someone else who will. So by igniting our senses, knowing bodily pleasure, and connecting with our hearts and our grasp of the divine, we can begin to set ourselves free of shame, guilt, and the puritanical ideas of our ancestor. So this notion of igniting our senses, as I said, using all 5 of our senses all day, every day, and noticing everything, being purely present with what you're drinking, what you're tasting, what you're touching, what you're seeing, what you smell, all of it creates a bodily-based pleasure for us in the moment. And that's super low-tech. It's easy to come by. We have it all the time. It's with us constantly. And when we connect with our hearts, to our bodies in that way, we have, I think, a glimmer of the divine. We are in that moment connected to that which we are made of. In some scriptures, they talk about being made in and out of the likeness of that which is, quote, God. And however you hear that, whether it's a metaphor or you hear it literally, if we are indeed made in the image of our, quote, creator, then it's an act of arrogance and disrespect to treat ourselves with anything less than divine attention, to be in gratitude for the beauty of this body that moves us through space at any given time, and to desire our own bodies, and not to make that just a sexual desire, like we're all running around, wanting to masturbate all the time because we desire our own bodies. That's not what I'm talking about. And I'm also not negating that, but I'm saying we can desire this body in a myriad of different ways every day. And when we do that, we start to set ourselves free of shame, which I've talked about many times before, but shame is a deep, deep feeling we feel in the very core of our center. That's the part of ourselves that can be the most disconnected and the most abused at times. And guilt, which is a left brain construct. Guilt is an idea that I shouldn't have done that, or I'm bad, or this is wrong, or I'm going to be in trouble. It's a story that we tell ourselves that isn't necessarily always true. So be on the lookout for the way that guilt keeps you from your bodily pleasure, from enjoying something sensual during the day. And it also sets us free of these puritanical ideas, as I was saying before, that we have to control desire at all times. So somebody's writing, let's see if I can see this note. If I may ask, as odd as this sounds, if indeed the relationship I have to myself is of main importance, then is it not true that masturbation doesn't require another consensual person? Therefore, where does this work apply to the idea of finding a consensual partner? Well, certainly you can masturbate without a consensual partner. If I'm understanding this question, you say, then is it not true that masturbation doesn't require another consensual partner? No, it doesn't. Masturbation is a self-regulatory or auto-regulatory process that we can all engage in for our own pleasure. It depends on how we use it, if it's life-affirming, if it's a form of self-care, or if it becomes a form of self-destruction and self-abuse over time. So we don't need another partner with us to masturbate. By definition, that's a solitary sexual activity. Obviously, you shouldn't be masturbating in front of someone if they don't consent to it. People that exhibit themselves in public and do that can be arrested for that because that's a non-consensual sexual act. But if you have a partner, you can do that with your partner, in front of your partner, together with your partner, as long as you have a conversation about that. So let me just find the rest of this communication. And then someone says, I'm not in a sexual relationship since my divorce 3 years ago. I use porn to masturbate and with my favorite fantasies that mostly have no basis in my experience or in my reality. I also go for touch and pleasure to a massage place with light touch and sexual release at the end. I feel guilt, but it's also very pleasurable. How do I pleasure myself or give myself pleasure other than these ways? I'm not going overboard in either case, but I still feel like I'm addicted to sexual pleasure from fantasy or paying for sexual pleasure and relief one time a month at most. So a couple of things here. You're saying you do this once a month and that you are using pornography, masturbation, and sexual massage once a month as a way to incorporate touch in your life. And you say you're not going overboard with either, but you feel addicted to pleasure. So that's a curious contradiction. Typically, people that are sexually addicted say that they're definitely going overboard. You're saying this is once a month, and that you're, quote, you're using the word addiction to pleasure in a way that may not be erroneous, but there is nothing wrong with wanting touch and pleasure. But you're saying that you feel guilty about it. So that's the thing that I think is worth investigating for you. Why do you feel guilt about these things that you're doing? Pleasure is pleasure. There are guilty pleasures, certainly. You know, eating a large piece of dessert for lunch is a guilty pleasure. It may not be something you want to be doing every day. If you do it once a month and you like it and you're not making yourself sick and you don't have, you know, diabetes problems, then it's probably fine for you. So in that case, I would have you investigate why the guilt is in place there. Maybe the guilt is there so you don't actually start to go overboard. But what about starting to date and not using these other external measures to get the kind of touch that you're looking for? Why not start to be affectionate with people, start to meet people, start to date casually, even have casual sex with people that you're not paying, so you can start to have an experience of what it's like to be relational with your sexuality and with touch. Because what you're describing right now, Christopher, is can be very isolating, and it can become a trap, because before you know it, I mean, you're 3 years into, you know, being single now, and if this is your primary source of pleasure, you may want to look at that and find ways of receiving pleasure from other people that start to create a better sense of yourself and maybe even a healthier sexuality. Someone says, how do you connect with someone who lives on the phone? They live on sports websites, political websites, Facebook, old movie sites, etc. I feel that he is seldom in the now here physically where we live. We're both in recovery, but this has been a trigger for me, and I know that even when I'm not here, this is what's going on. It's not in my hula hoop. He is up late and sleeps late and then stays inside doing this for hours during the day. Is this just my issue? Well, from the way you're describing it, it is your issue, and you're choosing to be in a relationship with someone who's not intimate, who's not present with you, who wouldn't rather turn these things off and have a long conversation with you or take a walk with you, or be physically active with you or something else with you. So you're describing a partner who appears to live in a one-person system, who's constantly regulating himself with all of these things outside of himself, leaving no room for you. So yes, I would say, unfortunately, this is your issue, and I would suggest that you really consider what you're going to do, because we cannot make other people change. We can only let them know the effect it has on us. And if after a certain point we become increasingly angry, they can say, see, you're just angry all the time. That's why I'd rather watch TV or, you know, read politics or be on Facebook, because you're no fun to be around. So you have to turn and look at yourself and ask yourself, why am I tolerating this? Why do I put up with this? Yes, you might love this person a lot, but it doesn't mean that you have to continue living with this person if it feels like you're living with someone who doesn't really care whether you're there or not, who's avoidant of you. And then you have to look at your own avoidant issues and ask yourself, why did I choose somebody like this? Why do I put up with this? Maybe this is all the intimacy I can actually handle. Maybe I'm too afraid of really throwing down the gauntlet because he might choose these other things over me. And then what does that say about me? And ultimately, I think we have to pick our pain. It's either the pain of being alone and finding out what it's like to be living by ourselves and taking care of ourselves once again, or the pain of living with someone that has us unhappy, that makes us unhappy, and that starts to turn us into someone that we don't recognize or know. So these are tough questions, and this is a true dilemma that I think that you're finding yourself in, Karen. So Christopher writes back and says, I use porn 1 to 2 times a week and massages less frequently. I am dating and looking for a partner, just haven't found someone to have sex with. So, all right, I would say tread lightly. be mindful about the porn, how you're using it, what it does for you, because men's brains have a high capacity for wiring up around these images. And of course, these images are so highly digitized and perfect that real live bodies don't align with them. And so your arousal can be muted in relation to a real live human being if you have too much porn on board. And I would also suggest that once you start dating somebody, that you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to date this woman now, and I'm going to make an experiment and see what happens if I stop looking at porn. It doesn't mean you shouldn't masturbate, and I'm definitely going to stop going to sexual massage parlors and see how that affects my body, my anxiety, if it has me turning more towards her, or if these other things always give us an outlet to not be fully present with the people we're endeavoring to get into a relationship with. And Max chimes in and says that, yeah, platonic relationships with women can be helpful, because it's true. You can get touch from platonic relationships. You can have these desire issues met by asking someone, hey, can I have a hug? And sometimes people hang out in groups, and everybody gets together and sort of cuddles on a sofa while they watch a good movie or a football game, and all of that kind of touch is a sort of pleasurable affection that we all need. So when you wish to become sexually connected to yourself and your partner, you want to meet them in this place of honor, honoring one another, making sure it's consensual, having conversations about the sort of things that we're talking about. When you're in your sexual integrity, desiring fully and freely invites a kind of honesty and a kind of nervous excitement. And I think that is important to remember, that oftentimes people want to get rid of the anxiety they feel around sex and sexuality, as opposed to recognizing that this is a part of having an adult sexuality, and that this is sort of the engine that drives us towards being sexual, that anxiety is arousal in the nervous system. So arousal doesn't just come in the form of erection or lubrication. It comes in the form of sweaty palms and heart beating and blood pressure going up and having anxiety. So accept that as part of your adult sexuality. Let yourself go with it. And don't be shy. Talk about your love, your carnal desire, what you're seeing, what you would like to see or do with your partner. This goes back to the Freudian quote that when we really are loving and lustful and lascivious with our partners, we're showing another side of ourselves. We're showing the heat of our desire. I just lost my internet connection. So I don't know if you all can still hear me, but here we go. Sorry, that happens sometimes. So as I was saying, just allow for all of what's going on in sex and sexuality. Let yourself be awkward. Let yourself be nervous, especially those of you that are dating now for the first time, that are out of relationships. You don't have to do this perfectly. In fact, sex gets better the more we get in tune with another person. It can be awkward and uncomfortable when it's the first time, because there's so much going on where we're hoping that, the person likes us, or that we're good enough, or that how our bodies look, or, our minds are filled with all sorts of self-consciousness. But when we really let that go and we just let ourselves be, there's a beauty in that kind of vulnerability and really seeing each other and being seen. And this kind of connection will inflame your emotional and physical arousal. So that allows you to desire fully and to love deeply, and to even reach, spiritual planes if that has meaning to you. So I would ask you, what does desire mean to you? What do you long for, and how do you call forth what you yearn for? And locate the source of desire in your body. It's not just in your genitals. I know it's not. I believe it's in your heart, it's in your gut. It may be a full body sort of celebration and yes. And when Max and Chris were chatting, Max says that he said, I admit this is hard work to move from sex positive from sex negative because, like food, it's a desire. And when I think of sex negativity, I think about sort of normative sexual practices, that you have to keep your sexuality in this tiny, thin box. And typically, it's an old definition of a male and a female having intercourse in missionary style position, and anything other than that is aberrant, bad, or wrong. So being sex positive means inviting all of who you are into your sexuality and having compassion for yourself and not judging yourself and just noticing, like, this is who I am. I like to drink blue Kool-Aid while I'm having sex. All right, go for it. Because everybody's so different in how they approach their sex and sexuality. Marlene says, speaking of telling your partner what you want to see and do, as in talking about scenes, when is that scene as healthy versus someone always wanting to have a scene or setting 95% of the time as in controlling the way things have to go? Does this indicate something wrong? Well, I am super moderate in the way that I conduct myself and how I think. So this is my bias, is that whenever anything is all or nothing, I have a problem with it. When there are gray areas and possibilities, that's when I think life is interesting. So if every single time you get together with your partner, he wants you to wear, high heels and lingerie and a short black skirt, and that's the only way he can get off, then you're dealing with something that's more fetishistic. And with that, he is not possibly available or interested in operating without that fetish. That can leave you feeling objectified, like you're only desirable from being objectified in this particular way, and that who you are, fully naked without any kind of costume is not enough for that person. And that may be true. And if that leaves you feeling empty, vacant, unseen, not loved, then that's your answer. So whenever anybody is reliant upon anything, I think that's worth examining, no matter what that thing is, whether it's, smoking weed to have sex or having a drink or having to dress up in a certain way. I believe that those things are managing anxieties and parts of our psyche that we just don't want to look at. And why not look at those things? Why not get curious? Why not make our sexuality more elastic? I think the person who's tied to a fetish is every bit as rigid as the person who's tied to missionary style position sex. There's a rigidity that locks people in that doesn't allow them to explore and integrate. And so I think you have to answer that question. The question of, what causes a fetish is a very long conversation. I would turn you to a book by Michael Bader called The Erotic Mind. There's lots and lots of speculation about what fetishes are, if they can be changed, what they mean. And generally, most people who have them aren't interested in changing them. And so, it can be an act of violence to ask that person to change them. So this is a negotiation between each couple and each person to really ask that person what it means for them. Oftentimes, for some people, fetishes can bring shame and humiliation, which is very tied to their capacity to orgasm. And so in that case, they may never be willing to give that shame and humiliation up. But knowing that allows you to consensually be in relationship with that. If you don't know it, you're kind of operating in the dark. So I would suggest you have a deeper conversation with your partner about this. And yes, you can love someone and you can consider that their fetish is a, quote, weird and different thing, which is what one of our callers just wrote in. So what is healthy desire? Well, that's up for grabs also. It depends on how you define healthy. So what's your greatest sexual fantasy? I would ask you to write that down and interpret it as you would a dream. This is not a new concept, but really if you write down what your most ardent desire is, if you could have any possible sexual fantasy in the world, what would it be? And then start to look at the component parts of it. What are the symbols of your desire? And what do they really mean to you? In other words, what are you truly seeking in sex? Is it physical pleasure? Is it emotional connection? A longing to be loved, seen, wanted, or all of the above? Because it's usually all of the above. But when we really unpack what we want sexually, we start to see what this longing is for. And oftentimes we can give it to ourselves. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't ever have sex again by any means. But it means that we sort of have a fluidity in our sexuality where we can move and undulate with these acts of desire and eroticism in a way that doesn't have us feeling like we're bound to one thing or another. And so does anybody have any further questions about this matter of sexual fantasy and desire and what we want and what we need? So keep in mind that you have a right to own your desire. Not let your desire own you and run you around and have you doing things you don't want to do. When we own our desire, just like when we own our sexuality, there's something fully empowering about that. It gives us back our integrity, our values, a sense of ourselves, that we can do whatever we want with our sexuality, as long as it becomes a place of celebration, of life affirmation, and not self-destruction, shame, and hurting other people. So anything goes when we're integrated, as long as we are alive, obviously alive, but aware and awake of the choices that we're making. So keep in mind that you can find our book, Mirror of Intimacy, on Amazon.com. Thank you always for sharing your reviews. We love reading them and appreciate the support that the community has given us of this book. And I hope today, on this May 1st day, that you walk around examining and experiencing your sensuality through all 5 of your senses, and that you have a beautiful day. I look forward to talking to you in June, and thank you.